In the Gold Coast, Nkrumah had formed his own political party and won a massive majority in 1956 elections. This resulted in getting the British to agree to grant independence in March of the following year. The United States' interest in Africa was at a peak, and a number of prominent Americans attended the independence celebrations. These included then Vice President Richard Nixon and Dr. Martin Luther King.
We will be jolly, merry and gay, the 6th of March, Independence Day.
Nkrumah took advantage of the moment to call for freedom throughout Africa.
Our independence is meaningless unless it linked up the total repression of the African continent.
At independence, everybody was excited. It was unbelievable. Everyone expected great things to happen. We're going to rule ourselves, decide on our own programs for education, for health, social services, improve agriculture, and industrialize our economy. So it was, the sky was the limit.
Following independence, Ghana became a magnet for nationalist leaders from all over Africa. Nkrumah hosted a series of conferences aimed at building support for a united Africa.
That brought in almost all the freedom fighters from Africa. South Africa, Rhodesia, East Africa, North Africa. These first crop of leaders, they were all attending the African freedom fighters conferences.
I appeal to you in the sacred name of Mother Africa to leave this conference resolved to rededicate yourselves to the speedy liberation of your territories.
Attending the conferences were Ahmed Sékou Touré of Guinea and a militant young nationalist named Patrice Lumumba from the Belgian Congo.
Je crois que les rencontres avec Nkrumah, Sékou Touré et les autres, c'était un tournant décisif dans le combat, disons, de Patrice, disons, de Lumumba, qu'il a senti que nous ne sommes pas seuls dans notre lutte.
Forward then to independence now. Tomorrow, the United States of Africa.
Nkrumah had always been a Pan-Africanist. From 1957, he, for a short period, becomes, without doubt, the leader of Africa. He is the first, most successful, most skillful, best known. He's on the cover of Time magazine. He's the toast of the town. This is one of the most famous men in the world. But this is a man, a colossus, intellectually, politically. And he makes Accra for a short period into the hub of African reaction to the colonial world, trying to bring together African politicians with an eventual view to creating a United Nations of Africa. That's the eventual ambition.
By the late 1950s, the French had undergone a major change in their African policy. A bloody civil war in their North African colony of Algeria in 1958 had led to the recall of World War II hero Charles de Gaulle. Soon after taking power, de Gaulle drafted a radical new French constitution. Among other things, it proposed independence for France's African colonies, but structured this in such a way that the former colonies would remain militarily, politically, and economically tied to France. France's African colonies would be allowed to vote in a referendum. A yes vote was an endorsement for de Gaulle's plan, independence but with close ties to France. A no vote was a vote for complete political and economic independence.
C'est sûrement que le gouvernement de Gaulle a préparé ce référendum-là pour justifier aux yeux de l'opinion internationale la légalité, la légitimité du régime français sur les territoires occupés.
In August of 1958, de Gaulle toured the African colonies to promote the yes vote. On the 25th of August, he arrived at Conakry, capital of French Guinea. De Gaulle made his way through cheering crowds to the Territorial Assembly. Here, Sékou Touré rose to bluntly address the French president.
Et Ahmed Sékou Touré a pris la parole pour dire au général de Gaulle que nous préférons la liberté dans la pauvreté à l'opulence dans l'esclavage. C'est ce jour-là qu'il l'a prononcé. Et le général de Gaulle et son entourage ont estimé que cela, c'est un affront.
On September 28th, the African citizens of French colonies voted. All voted yes except in Guinea, where an astounding 95% voted no.
Only Sékou Touré in Guinea votes not, and is punished very severely by the French for doing that. And all aid, all school teachers, there are stories of taps being ripped out of walls and so on by the departing French, which throws Sékou Touré very much on to the mercy of the Soviet Union at that particular juncture.
Nous ont forcés à être socialistes. Ils ont retiré tout leur matériel. Ils ont retiré tout. Eh bien, est-ce qu'on va, comment on dit, crever de faim, de soif, de machin, on ne peut pas s'habiller? Eh bien, c'est pour cela. Les gens ont tendu la main. Est-ce que l'esclave peut être idiot pour revenir encore? Non, 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 je ne veux pas, je veux rester esclave. Non, nous avons dit non, non et non.
The French reaction left Sékou Touré and Guinea in financial crisis. Sékou Touré flew to Ghana to consult with Nkrumah. In a gesture of solidarity, Nkrumah agreed to give Sékou Touré 10 million British pounds, an enormous sum at the time.
Both of them believed in socialism as the way forward for African countries. Both of them were nationalistic in perception. Both of them were ardent supporters of African unity.
What was to become a lifetime friendship was cemented with a dramatic agreement to work towards a full union of the two countries.
Good evening. Welcome to Divine Speech in African Traditionalism. I am your host, Augustine Ayinibisah Ayelah. To seek permission to speak, I write before my father and my mother, the two individuals who taught me right from wrong. I write before my grandfather and grandmother, whom I call my first ancestors. I write before the deities, the land deities, the water deities, and the sky deities. I write before the goddesses, especially the goddess Ma'at, to give me balance so that I make this presentation for people to understand. I write before the god Jehuti. I write before all the gods, especially the god Jehuti, the god of knowledge, the god that taught humans how to read and write, to endow me with speech so that after finishing this presentation, all my viewers and listeners will know what they have gone through. Finally, I rise before the Supreme Being, Amon-Re, the amalgamated rulers of the universe, to grant me stay in power so that I can endure and complete this presentation without offending anybody. And with this prayer, I know I'm permitted to speak. Recent developments, including the dismembering of Mali, the encroachment of violence from Somalia into neighboring Kenya, the continued conflict in Northeast Africa, especially the war between the Sudan and South Sudan, the capture of Goma in the Congo by rebels loyal to Rwanda and Uganda, calls for an important documentary and commentary for a new plan of action to save the continent of Akebuland, now Africa. This is neither my documentary or commentary. It is a documentary and commentary that was left to Africans by the father of African nationalism, Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. It is a blueprint for the survival and success of Africa. Africans should have no one else to blame for their misery and impoverishment, because the blueprint is there for us to read, follow, and implement. The task is no longer in the hands of Kwame Nkrumah. It is now in the hands of Africans. Why we are engulfed with all these problems after half a century of political independence, and who can help us? Where are we going to find solutions to our problems? This PowerPoint presentation will take us through a journey with the blueprint left to Africans by ancestor Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Let's watch the early stages of Nkrumah's preparation for leadership. Whereas the Berlin Conference of 1884 became Africa's undoing in more ways than one, little could anybody think one day one person would almost single-handedly dislodge European colonial powers who had superimposed their domains on the continent. But Africa's mystery system came to the rescue with the birth of a child of modest means 24 years later at Nkrofo in a land under the British. This child emerged 40 years later to emancipate the people and the land from colonial bondage. Even though irreparable damage had been dealt to Africa, Kwame Nkrumah's strident stand against colonialism and his calls for self-rule became a force to reckon with. His early influences included Dr. Kedre Agri, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, and his later influences included Marcus Mazaya Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois. Dr. Agri was the assistant headmaster of Achimota Secondary School when young Kwame Nkrumah was admitted. Agri had studied in the United States and advocated for the formal education of Africans as a means to emancipate themselves from political and economic injustices.